Good morning. I had debated waiting until the scheduled time in order to do this, but it's been the topic of AI assistance and AI assistance in programming and game development, especially, has been weighing pretty heavily on my mind recently, and so I figured uh, might as well talk about it now. For a quick disclaimer, none of my opinions reflect those of my employer, if you can even find my employer. That's not a challenge, by the way, but none of my opinions reflect those of my employer. And it's a little interesting because what I do for my employment is very closely related to AI. And so there's a little bit of cognitive dissonance in what I'm comfortable with and what I do as a day to day that we'll talk about a little bit here. I don't think this video is going to be terribly long, but I think it will be important, if only to get my thoughts and ideas out onto digital paper, so to speak. So, AI assistance, and particularly what I think and when I use it and what I use it for. First, any kind of creative work, so that's art generation, story generation, basically anything creative within the realm of a game. It could even be gameplay ideas, but anything creative, writing, my personal blog, I do not use any kind of AI assistance tool. Not even for like grammar checking or as a passing tool. I do not use it. I strongly feel that a person's writing is very important, and their particular voice, no matter how cohesive that voice may be or how clean it may be according to grammar rules, I think that's extremely important for them to find their own voice, and that we hear their voice and not the voice of GPT-5. Okay, so no to creative work. I also think that belittles those who engage in creative work as a career, and I strongly believe that the multimodal models that are creating art and creating videos and even creating stories are able to do so because they stole assets and utilized individuals' assets without their permission. And because of that, I think it is a moral failing to use those models for those purposes, for any kind of generation purposes of creative works. And I think it's an incredible moral failing to move that direction. And I struggle with even seeing articles with AI generated banners, AI generated tag, or AI generated like hero banners and stuff like that, because I feel like it takes away not only work, but it belittles the work of those who engage in creative, especially since it's based on their work. It's it's like a really heavy derivative, and it really frustrates me. So that's the first big tenet I live by with regards to AI assistance. I do not use it for any creative work. Any of my game development that requires anything creative, I do not use AI. My blogs, I don't use AI. My emails that I send my coworkers, those are kind of creative. I typically don't use AI. Now, this brings us to game code and the code behind a video game, because that is something that I think you can argue AI can do well within certain bounds and used as a tool, not used as a go do this and accomplish this task for me as a vibe everything. One of my most interesting case studies is that of Mitchell Hashimoto. Um, he started HashiCorp. He built helped build Terraform. He's working on a terminal emulator called Ghosty and Zig. And I mean, he's done a lot of stuff: Terraform, Vault, Console, Vagrant, lots of different things. And he is very. It's interesting because I don't know if he's pro AI so much as pro AI assistance in development. He's written a couple of really good blog posts called "My AI Adoption Journey," vibing a non-trivial ghosty feature, in which he lays out how he uses AI assistance in coding as a tool and not necessarily as a crutch. And it's his opinions, his writing, which he doesn't use AI assistance for, and some of the opinions of one of my previous mentors, who's still a very good friend, that has shifted my initial, let's say, like visceral reaction against AI into more of a, this is a tool that I can and should probably use in certain areas. So, for example, at work, I do use AI assisted coding. Um, I think commercial software is at a disadvantage when it comes to the open source community because AI agents build so heavily using open source libraries and tools, and because they've been trained on those. So even though AI assistance is a thing, I think open source is still extremely important, and I think there's still going to be a lot of hand coding, or at least building of these building blocks. Um, but I just don't think you're going to be able to move fast enough anymore without using some kind of AI assistance in your programming. And I think that's just the fact of the matter right now. When it comes down to it, customers and stakeholders typically don't care about the elegance of the code. They only care about the quality of the code when that quality impacts them negatively and impacts them consistently negatively. Um, and so with that in mind, I have I have more frequently used AI assistance in my work and some of my side projects that aren't game related. And partly that's to keep my eye on the ecosystem, to understand what agents are out there, understand the workflows, because if I don't, I'm probably going to be left behind as a software engineer or be relegated to some very niche areas or niche situations, such as, governments that don't use them, or certain things that can't use them. And so it's kind of a survival instinct of staying relevant and making sure that I can still function in my profession to use these tools. I'm not going to talk too much about the problems with the environment. I think we are, because I think that's less of an issue with AI. So let's be clear. AI is destroying the environment not because it's AI, but because of capitalism and the incessant need for profit, for growth at the expense and exploitation of everyone around them. So AI is not, to me, the most massive problem in this. It is more that it is unfettered capitalism and this idea that, we are going to exploit everything, including the earth, especially the earth, um, in order to accomplish the goals of raising more capital. That's where I struggle with AI. I don't think AI is necessarily inherently evil. I think the way we've gotten to certain benchmarks, or sorry, certain milestones, has had aspects of evil in them. I think we could have gotten to the same area had we treated the source materials with respect, had we worked with copywriting and making sure that we are, validating those copyrights as we train these models, which a lot of the frontier models did not do, that we know of, and that's been fairly well shown so far. And again, their excuse is, well, if we don't do it that way, then we're not going to be competitive. We're not going to be able to get out there. We're not going to have AI. And my opinion is, well, maybe we need to go a little slower. So again, AI itself, I don't think is inherently evil, but how we're using it and how we're working with it today is definitely not something that I agree with. Um, that brings us again back to game development because this is a game development channel. This is about a software engineer coming in to game development after being in commercial software for a very long time. And the question becomes, I know AI can help with code, and I know it does a decently good job of code. Do I use that when developing a game? And I think there's two or three questions that I have to ask myself. One, is the code, the literal actual code that I am writing for the game, is that a creative work? Does that make sense? Is that the same level of creative work that an art piece is, or that the audio assets are, or that, fake voices are? Am I taking away work from someone? That's a whole nother argument, but is it an art? And I struggle with that because on one hand, you could argue yes, because there are certain feelings in the game that come from the code that generates, or that generates these feelings, that is very specific to, let's say, how they coded a jump, right? But those are properties of the code. That's not necessarily the code itself. I don't think anyone really has cared up until now about the code behind the video game unless they are an engineer. And the only reason we see people caring about the code in games now with regards to AI assisted programming is because it's part of a giant culture war in gaming right now, that's centered around AI. And I think you can glean my stance pretty well without me having to um, go into it very in depth here. So the first question is, do I believe that my game's code is a creative work? And the answer is no. I believe they're building blocks, and I believe there's certain aspects that they generate a creative work. But I do not believe the physical code is a creative work. What I build with it is the creative work. How I put jumping, logic together, how I put an ECS system in with a simulation together, that is creative. And if I'm doing something very innovative in code, which sometimes in games you are, that could be considered creative work. And that kind of segues into my guidelines for when I use AI assisted programming and when I don't. Um, so if it's not all a generative, or sorry, an artistic work, or a creative work, then there are some areas in which I feel comfortable using AI. However, there are guidelines which I have made, which I stick to very rigorously, in order to not let the AI become a crutch, and in order to produce the best quality item I can, um, without moving forward, or while still moving forward. So first is, am I taking work away from someone that I have the ability to pay, or that is interested in working on this? And if I'm taking away somebody else's ability to do work and their opportunity to learn and do work, then especially for where this is a side project, I try not to use AI. I have some individuals helping me with some of the story and like Yarn Spinner and some of the other game code, and I very consciously avoid doing any kind of AI assistant programming that touches any of those areas, so as not to impinge upon their work. So that's one. The other very heavy guideline is if I do not know how to do something, I will not use AI assisted coding. So a good example is, let's say I need to load for my game, um, and I think I can. Let's see. Let me see if I can show you my game really quick, where it's at as of right now. Uh, Okay, so you're only going to see part of it, but can I? So, for example, for one of my games, or for one of the game aspects, I had to load this tile map in. And I did not know how to load a tile map with regards to Bevy, with ECS, with tiled. And it would have been fairly easy. And in fact, after I did do it, I asked AI to take a shot at to see how well it would do. To ask AI to, hey, here's my tile map from tiled. Can you load this into my game? And it probably would have done okay depending on the model and the tools that were available to it. But I didn't know how to do that. So how am I supposed to review that code? How am I supposed to make sure it fits within the rest of my game, within the rest of my engineering feel? How do I make sure it's not like going off the rails? And if I'm doing this as a side project and to learn and as a hobby, what am I stealing from future me by using AI assistants to do something that I don't know how to do? I don't believe AI assisted programming or communicating with a chatbot is a good learning tool. For some people, maybe, but for me, it is not a good learning tool because it is non-deterministic. There are hallucinations, and I think we are losing the skills of reading documentation, of being able to read error messages. I have dealt with engineers that will not read error message. They just copy and paste them into ChatGPT. And it frustrates me to no end that we are just not reading and comprehending and having that reading comprehension anymore. So if I do not know how to do something, and that includes debugging this or figuring out what it is, I will not use AI assisted programming because it takes it away, takes the learning away from me, it takes the experience away from me, and it cheapens this whole side project and my hobby. Now, what I do use it for is if I do know how to do something and I have a good idea of what I need to do, I might write a spec instead of writing the code and ask AI to do it because it's a lot of code. It would take me a long time to get just right. And the iterative loops that an AI agent can go through to solve some of these problems and build some of this code is a lot faster than what I can do. So, for example, once I know how to load tile maps, I might ask the agent later on, it's like building a new game, hey, taking what I've previously done for loading tile maps, can you write a quick loader that loads this tile map in this way? Because I know how to do it and I know how to do this. If I need, for example, okay, I know there's collision tiles, I know where they're at, I know how I'm going to do this. I need to iterate through the collision tiles, I need to build a map, but I don't want to do that by hand. Let me lean on some AI assisted programming to do that. And I think that's where AI assisted programming can excel when it has very clear and concise tasks and specifications in bite-sized pieces that help you glue things together, not telling it to do the entire thing by itself. And in that way, I'm not losing my ability to program. I'm not losing the ability to understand my software. And I've seen very often when people start vibe coding in a project that very quickly that project can become untenable by humans. They just it's so convoluted that humans cannot get in there and understand the code anymore. Now there are some people that are arguing very heavily for this thing, and they're calling it immutable code and regenerative code with this idea that, well, what shouldn't change are specs and all that stuff, but the code, or sorry, what can change are specs and guidelines and maybe tests, but the code itself should always be generated and just thrown away wholesale, and regenerated. I don't know that I agree fully with that camp. I think in some cases it makes sense, um, where code becomes the cheap item and not like the end goal. I think the shared understanding between a team is extremely important, maybe more so than the code itself. But this idea that code is just throw away and we should never try to understand it and learn about it, I think is incorrect. Is too far, in the other camp. I think we need to find a happy medium of, well, we need humans to understand this. We should be able to change the code, especially I have seen agents so quickly get stuck in a loop trying to solve a simple problem, and just blowing the code base up trying to do so, that that is just not that's just not tenable. So to recap, because I think I'm almost done here, I never use AI assistance for anything creative, ever. Period. That will never happen. Um, my argument is that a lot of game engine code is not creative. And I know that this can be decisive. There's going to be there might be people that argue very heavily that code is very creative. And I'm not arguing that code is creative or what you generate and build with code is creative. What I am talking about is that the individual building blocks of code are not creative. Think of it as like Legos. A Lego brick itself is not creative at all. What you build with that brick, how you put those bricks together, and the big picture is the creative work. So how you make the brick, I don't know matters too much. And the brick itself, if the brick is AI generated, does that matter when how you're putting it together and the work that you are generating at the end is still you and still you controlling it. So think of it that way. um, Code itself, the let, if, and then, those are not creative things. Those are building blocks, and what you build with it is a creative thing. And the act of putting these things together, putting these blocks together, is a creative work. But we're raising that abstraction bar where instead of building blocks being the if statements, the building blocks are much bigger, modules and objects and functions, and we are putting these building blocks together. So that's my two big things. The guidelines I have are I never use AI to do something that I do not know how to do myself. I don't have to know it perfectly, but I have to have a really good idea of how I want to do it and how to do it, and maybe have done it myself a few times. And then, I do not use AI in any way to avoid learning. That's where I'm at. Again, some of this might be very decisive, and if you have different opinions, I am welcome to hearing them. I have struggled with the use of AI in my job, and just in general, feeling like I'm losing part of myself in programming, a big part of my identity, which is a good or bad thing. Tying your identity so closely to an object is not necessarily a good thing. But I would love to hear about your struggles. I would love to hear about what you all deal with AI, and where you feel it lands in game development. Again, nothing creative, but the game code itself is not creative. The game you make and what you make with that code is creative. But the building blocks, if those are generated by AI, it does not matter to me. So, thank you so much for watching. I hope